Hey, good morning, everyone. And this is being recorded so we can post to our webpage and allow our colleagues to have future viewing. My name is Jared Morrison. I'm an organization development consultant with the Learning and Organizational Development Unit in OSU Extension. And we welcome you on today. This is our partnership with ACEL, the Department of Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership. And this has been our monthly webinar series for the past, I think, 8 months now that we've been really excited to have. And we've had some great attendance and engagement from our system. So we appreciate you hopping on today. We do have a webpage that all the recordings, including this one, that will be posted to. And I'll post that in the chat box here, but it's go.osu.edu/ACEL2extension. And again, I'll put that down in the chat here, but please find information about the program and the recording for this webinar as soon as it's processed on that page as well. So without too much further ado, just want to thank Beth Flynn, really leading the organizing on ACEL's side. So thanks so much for your work. And then we'll turn kind of to today's topic, which you can see up here is telling the farm story. And we'll have Dr. Emily Buck and Dr. Joy Rumble leading this session. So I'll turn it over to Emily and Joy.
Thanks, Jared. I figure we can, Joy, if you want to, we can introduce ourselves. We didn't really talk about that part, but for those of you who don't know us, I'm Dr. Emily Buck. I'm a professor of ag communications in the ACEL department. Have worked with ACEL for, gosh, 15 years now. It makes me feel old. But a lot of my research and a lot of my professional experience has been doing social media communications, how we talk about our farms, essentially, what works, what doesn't. And a lot of the courses I even teach on campus are related to that. Joy, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself. Sorry about that. I think I was reaching for the mute button and advanced the slide, and then the video started, and it was real loud on my end. So I was doing some quick troubleshooting. But my name is Dr. Joy Rumble, and I am an assistant professor in agricultural communication. And I am physically stationed at the Worcester campus, but very much a part of ACEL and help to advise graduate and undergraduate students and teach graduate and undergraduate classes as well. And my research focuses on consumers' perceptions of agriculture, or particularly food-related issues, and how communication can influence or change opinions and perceptions over time. And so I do a lot of work with food-related issues and how we can understand opinions and then also influence those opinions. So naturally, storytelling becomes part of that, because that is one of the strategies we can use to help change opinions or help people at least understand the agricultural perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, Joy. We were thinking this morning we would, well, before we jump in, if anybody has any comments or questions, we'll try and follow the chat here. But if you do, just raise your hand. We wanted to start this morning with a video, and we'll see if this will work for us. I don't know if you want to try and play this, Joy, see if it'll come up. It's probably going to come up in YouTube, I'm sure.
Can you see the video?
Well, this is coming up. Yep.
Okay. You want me to press play?
We're testing. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Joy. I don't know how many of you have seen this video. This is the trailer for it's 30 Harvests, put out by the U.S. Farm and Ranchers Alliance. I wanted us to start with this video because it's a great example of telling a farm story in a unique way and in a different way. But we realize that not all of us have large budgets and film crews and the expertise to put something like that together, let alone the dynamics of the gentleman in this video. His name is Jay Hill, a friend of mine, and just his personality is crazy and dynamic, and not all of us are like that and want to be in videos like this. So it's important that we start thinking about how can we tell our stories and our farm stories and what we're doing in ways that are doable for us, that are doable for our clientele. So for today, what we wanted to do, and I'll have you go forward, Joy, for let us, awesome. We wanted to sort of discuss some of the benefits of storytelling, followed by just what are the parts of a story, reminding us, going back to first grade. My daughter is in first grade and she is learning the parts of a story right now. I'm currently teaching that. So it's taking us back to our basics of what is a story and how can we use that and frame our story in a way that matches our audience and relates and really resonates with people. And how do we take that for our own personal stories, but also those of us as extension educators? How do we get our clientele, our youth, to tell their stories in a good way? So I think if you think about the different stories that are happening in agriculture today, if you want to go forward. The delay of Zoom that we're all facing, and I will apologize right now for all of you. We do not have Brad Paisley? Yeah, we don't have him coming on our call this morning, but so our delay isn't as fun as some others. But looking at agriculture today, what are the stories that are out there that we are facing and that we are looking at? And everything from a story, a text, a Facebook post, news. I was watching the Today Show this morning, my husband was, and they were talking about agriculture. Everything that we're putting out there is putting out a story. And, you look at this photo and what is the story behind this photo? Depending on who you are, the questions that you could be asking, what are they spraying? Is that something I'm going to be having to eat? I hope I don't have to eat that. I can't believe they're putting that stuff on my food. What exactly is that they're growing? Consumers don't have a full understanding of these things. And when they see videos, they see images just in passing, if they're not seeing a full story, they may not understand exactly what's happening. And sometimes we have these negative stories and these negative images out there, but sometimes we also have something that maybe even a little bit positive. When the next slide comes up, it's a photo of something just a little bit softer rather than spraying chemicals, but probably spraying water. This is just another example of an image that could be very, very similar and could have the same exact stories, but depending on your background, the story could be a little different. So, to somebody else, they may say, oh, this is water. So is that water? Is that an okay thing? Depending on where you are. Obviously in Ohio, we don't have the water shortage that maybe California does. So somebody around us may have a different feel of this story. But again, people are going to wonder, what is in that field? What are we seeing? Is that a beautiful image for us? And so as we think about, what our story is, we've got to think about what do we have in front of us. And today that's a constant changing thing in agriculture. I was at a conference a couple of years ago and Temple Grandin was speaking, and the first thing she said to the group just really hit home with me. And she looked at us and she goes, every single person in this world today has a television camera. And as somebody who teaches communication, it hit me, and I was like, that's something I know, but hearing it again just reminds you that everyone out there has the ability to tell a story because of the cell phone that is in their pocket, or in their hand. And so if we're not out there telling those stories, we don't know what those stories might be, right? People who don't understand agriculture and see that first image that we saw may not be able to correctly identify what's happening in that image. And because of that, they may be putting out a story that is misrepresented, has misconceptions. So if we're not out there telling it, someone else is going to tell it for us. So it's extremely important that we're on the forefront of these storytellers, and that we're using that television camera that's in our pockets, or our voices. You think about today is Earth Day. What better time for somebody in agriculture, whether it's us in Extension or our clientele, our youth, to be out telling a story about what we're doing. I know when I woke up this morning, the first thing I thought is, okay, what kind of story post should I be putting on our farm page, because it is Earth Day. So we really need to stop and reflect about how important it is for us to tell these stories in today's society. I'm not good at telling Joy to go forward. I need like a hand signal. And if, like I said this morning, I saw something on the Today Show. We are living right now through something that I don't need to tell you how unique and interesting of a time we are living through right now. You're all facing this on a daily basis with your worlds. But in agriculture, even more than before, stories are going to be hugely important. This image, unfortunately, is an image that I think a lot of us have seen, and are going to continue to see for a while. Hopefully not for a long while, but this is a story that's out in the media, and people don't understand what this is, and they don't understand what it means. They don't understand what it means for them as a consumer. They don't understand what it means for those gentlemen sitting there watching their livelihood be put into a lagoon, right? So it's important that we start thinking about what can we say when something like this comes out. And it's us in Extension that really can make an impact at that local level. When something like this comes out nationally, we have the ability to gather our forces, get our clientele, get our youth, get our ourselves out there and put a positive story out there, or an explanation type story out there. If you look at the research, it says for every negative story out there, it takes at least 4 to 5 positive impressions in the opposite direction to sort of turn people's idea. And while this isn't necessarily a negative story, it's not a positive one, right? So we need to make sure that we're putting all of those points out there.
All right, so now I'm going to take over for a little bit and talk to you a little bit about the benefits of storytelling. And so Dr. Buck has started to allude to this a little bit, but I think, as we think about this, while there are really heartbreaking things happening in the agricultural industry right now, and, it's not just the agricultural industry, but I think while these things are happening, it is also creating a huge opportunity to tell these stories and to show the resilience, to show, people changing their systems to make it work, showing how they're overcoming. And really, as we'll talk about here in a second, when we have these barriers or these roadblocks, those are really what makes a good story anyway. And so we can utilize those roadblocks and barriers to tell a really rich story that can help us to connect with our audience. And so when we talk about the benefits, some of the specific benefits is the increased agricultural literacy. And so people remember communication better when it's in the form of a story. So when we're talking about, the picture that we just saw beforehand with the farmers dumping their whole tank of milk, right? If that was a really rich story coming from the farmer's perspective about what it meant to dump that tank of milk and why it was being dumped, you know, they might connect with it better. They might remember it, and they might understand how everything in the world today is impacting these farmers and how that's really making them feel, and you know, why it's happening. Storytelling can also help to curb the anti-science or anti-agriculture movement. A lot of times people will say that our competitive counterparts out there in the world are really good at telling stories against us sometimes. And so we have to be just as good at telling our own stories to help push back on that a little bit. These stories can also help have a renewed interest in agriculture. And I'm going to give an example of one of my own experiences recently. So there was a New York Times article about the Amish in Holmes County that came out in the last couple of weeks, and how basically in a week they transformed all of their traditional businesses into sewing masks and making face shields for the health industry and for Cleveland Clinic. And I've always, you know, growing up in Ohio, I've always, you know, known about the Amish communities and really thought it was kind of a cool and unique thing to the state. But seeing the story and just like the resilience and how they did this and came together as a community, it really renewed my interest in them. And so we can do the same things through our storytelling to help people have a renewed interest in agriculture. And I think, again, right now is a really, really great opportunity to do that, because people are already talking about, oh yeah, I'm going to garden, or oh yeah, I'm going to try to do some canning like my grandmother used to. And so they're already starting to have this renewed interest in agriculture, and that's something that we can connect with consumers on as they start to naturally kind of return to some of those agrarian roots. Also, storytelling, it helps us to take really complex information and put it in a more simple and comprehensible form. So, you know, agriculture and science can get really complex and really complicated. And so putting it in the form of a story, you know, allows us to boil that down. I mean, I want you to think even as simple as like, you know, take like a children's storybook. You know, a lot of times they talk about really hard topics. I mean, I've seen some that talk about, you know, maybe they talk about science, or they talk about food, or they talk about introducing a new child to the family, or they talk about a death in the family. They take really complicated, hard things and put them in a simple form for a child. And we can do the same things through storytelling. And as we think about this, we are going to be talking about storytelling from the standpoint of basically an agriculturalist or a farmer telling their story. But knowing that you all are mainly from the extension realm, I want you to remember that these are things that you can use for your own storytelling also, as you tell stories about your program, or as you write a success story or an impact statement. These strategies are still successful in those settings as well, but they can also help you in your programming to encourage your clientele to tell their stories as well. All right, so why is your story important? So we've alluded to this a little bit, but if you are able to craft your story successfully in a way that makes an emotional connection, people are going to remember it. They're going to remember you. And so this photographer that I've used here, this image, he's really good at showing rich agriculture pictures of farmers and production practices. And I think that his stories all tell a story. And I think the reason that they tell a story is because of the way that he frames these pictures. You can see the emotion in a lot of these pictures. You can see, you know, the years of hard work. You can see the dedication in the pictures. And we can do that with our words also. And when we build those emotional connections, then it helps people remember. And so as we move into thinking about these different parts of the story, I want you to think about a little bit about your audience and what things do they care about. You know, we're all humans, so a lot of the emotional things that connect us are the same among audiences, no matter your background. And so you have to find what those emotional commonalities are that you have between you and your audience. And if you can focus on those in your story, it can help people to connect with you and remember your story. So to be able to share your story, though, it's best to be prepared with a well-developed story. I know that, you know, whether I'm giving a lecture or a presentation, if I haven't prepared in advance, my story is not going to be delivered as well as if it could have been if I would have prepared in advance. And so probably all of you have heard the phrase like elevator pitch before, right? So you want to have a story for your farm or a story for your program, and you're going to have it well rehearsed and in the back of your mind, but also know that, you know, this is my general elevator speech or my elevator pitch, or this is my story, but if I'm talking to this group of people, I might leave this part out and insert another part. Or if I'm talking to this group of people, I might leave that part out about, you know, maybe biosecurity and insert the part about getting safe food to our consumers. You know, like, you will tailor the story based on who your audience is. And so you're going to have one core story, but you should be able to influence your story with by knowing who your audience is. And really that primary message, though, is what you want to stick to. So when we talk about developing a story, there's three main things that you want to think about first. Who is the lead character? Your story is going to be a lot more focused if you have a lead character that you can focus on. And so maybe that lead character, you know, if it's for your program, maybe that lead character is you as an extension faculty, or maybe it's one of your program participants. If you're telling a success story about how your program impacted their lives, that they could be that lead character. If you're encouraging your farmers or clientele to tell their story, you know, oftentimes they might be the lead character. It might be somebody in their family or in their business, or it could be one of their customers as well. And then you want to think about what the goal of the story is. What is that lead character trying to accomplish? And so when we think about the goal of the story, a lot of times we might have our self-motivated goals for the story. Well, I want to tell my story because I want people to know why this is important. But I also encourage you, as you think about the goal of the story, is to also think about your end audience. Because if your audience doesn't care about your goal, then your goal of the story is not going to be successful. And so make sure that your goal is worthy to both you and your audience. And then I want you to think about what roadblocks or conflicts this leading character is overcoming to really accomplish the objective or the goal of the story. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that roadblock or the conflict is really what kind of ties people into the story and commits them to the story and helps them to remember it. And so the roadblock or conflict actually ends up becoming a really important piece. And, you know, sometimes I think people can be pretty humble and be like, oh, well, there's no roadblocks, there's no conflicts in my story, but there are. They're in everybody's story. So you just have to think a little bit about what those might be. And then once you've identified those first few things, the lead character, the goal of the story, and the roadblock, then you're going to think about, you know, expressive details that can support those things. What are some rich adjectives that I can use in my story? How can I make people feel like they were there as I tell my story? Think about those rich details. You know, as simple as describing the scene can be really impactful. If people can feel like they're there right beside you as you tell their story, it can help them to make that emotional connection and remember it. Also think about if there's other multiple obstacles. You're going to have your one main conflict or barrier, but also think about other obstacles that can help to really tell your story. You want to make sure that your story is logical. You know, sometimes when, you know, you might be talking to a farmer at a local coffee shop and they start telling you about, you know, something that happened at the beginning of their business, and then they jump to current day, and then they jump back 25 years and, you know, back and forth and back and forth. You don't want your story to do that. You want it to be very logical in progression. And then even story organization can be really important. And so you've identified your lead character, you've identified your goal, you've identified your roadblocks, you're thinking about expressive details, things to support your story. Then the next step is to really start laying that out. And as silly as it sounds, if you use this format to draft your story, it will help that story come together and really create a solid story. And so the suggested format for storytelling is using and, but, therefore, or AABT. And so essentially, this guideline is just a recommended format to help you connect the points of your story. So, you know, as you start your story, maybe you write the first couple sentences, then you're going to insert that and, right? Okay, so here's my story, but then put the and in to encourage yourself to give more points, to add more points to your story. And then the second and is going to prompt you to add even more details, dig a little bit deeper. And then you're going to get to that but, and that but is where you're introducing that roadblock. So you're giving some background, you're connecting points, you're adding more details, but this really challenging or bad thing has happened. Here's this roadblock. This is where you start to really pull your audience into your story. And, but you know, no story is always just going to end on the bad or challenging thing. We're going to have the therefore. And this is where you introduce those plans to overcome it. That's where you share the good news. This is where you share the resilience. And so, you know, I've seen lots of worksheets and I've guided people through this before, and really drafting your stories can start with as simple as like, here's a sentence and here's a sentence, but, and here's another sentence, and therefore here's the last sentence. And then really just expanding upon that as you add expressive details. And then as you form that story, you'll get it smoother and smoother and smoother. And at some point, you probably won't even see the and, but, and therefore in your story anymore, but the format is still there in the order and the organization. And so here's one that I have drafted using that format. And I chose this because I was an animal science undergraduate and I've worked on lots of large hog farms. And so when we talk about animal welfare of hogs and pigs, that usually is something that hits near and dear to my heart. And so I drafted this story, and you'll see that, you know, I've given a couple of sentences, and then I've put and then and but. You know, there's this challenge of consumers feeling that farrowing crates are inhumane. And so what's Farmer Joe doing about it? Well, he's working with local veterinarians and extension to make sure that his sows and piglets are receiving the best care. And now as you read through this, some things you might be thinking, Joy, well, I mean, yeah, you followed the organization, but the story does not flow very well. It doesn't sound very well. I don't think it will connect with the consumer audience. It's too long, it's too short. And all of those things may be true. And I wouldn't ever say that this story is in its final form. This is to demonstrate the organization and the format. You would continue to edit this story. You would continue to model it and mold it to your audience. And we'll show you another version of this here in a couple of slides where it has been you know, further edited for a consumer audience. And you would also edit it depending on your communication channel. So you're going to be making edits based on your audience, as well as what communication channel you're using to communicate with them. And so if we're going to be using social media, something like Twitter, it's obviously going to be much shorter. And maybe, you know, we're only using a portion of the story, or maybe throughout a week, we're going to tell this whole story on social media and get people coming back for more and for more and for more. And so you really got to think about, you know, tailoring these stories to not only your audience, but also that communication channel. And so when you share your story, I really want to encourage you to focus on that primary point. And so, you know, even though we've talked about that your story might change and it might shift, and depending on your audience, it might shift, what's the one thing that you're always going to come back to? Or what's that common thread that somebody could find in your story, no matter what version you're sharing with them? That should really be that primary point. Remember to create that emotional connection. And something that I want to encourage you to do here is sometimes, especially in the agricultural industry, I know that it's happened to me before, is that I feel like something creates a really strong emotional connection. all right, and maybe I'm feeling it. And then I ask somebody else who's also involved in the agricultural industry if they're feeling it. And they're like, yeah, that hits home, like I really feel it. And then you show it to a consumer and they're like, well, I don't care about that. And so really check your emotional connections. I'm sure we all have connections with people outside of the industry. And if your target audience is outside of the industry, don't be afraid to just do a soft pass past some of those audience members before you share your message widely or your story widely, and see if it's hitting home or if it's meeting that emotional connection with that audience before you really broadcast it broadly. And then you're going to want to make sure that you emphasize that message strongly and support the core of your story with the details, or the core message with the details of your story. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, you're going to want to frame your story for both that communication channel and that audience. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Buck.
Thanks, Joy. Being the academicians and researchers that we are, we wouldn't let you get away without seeing a little bit of theory and why we do some of these things. When we talk about framing and how we frame the story to the medium and to the message, there's some things that we need to think about. I was going to say, I'm going to answer Lydia's question before we move on. In reference to the sample story using ABT, the animal scientist and he wants to add studies that support the farmer, but should we avoid using science-based information when communicating our on-farm story? And I think that's a great question because it sort of leads to what I'm about to say. When we look at the people that we are talking to, we have to really understand where they're coming from when we think about what we're adding into that story. So whether we're adding the science-based facts or we're putting those facts in a different way that don't show that they're science-based. It's sort of like making food for your young child. You don't tell them that you're putting vegetables in it every time, but you're putting some vegetables in there to make sure they're healthy, right? So we really need to understand where they're coming from. And so as we think about how we're going to frame the story, it's a couple things that we need to understand. And the first off is that we all run through our world, and we look through our world, and the lenses that we use are all through a thing called cognitive dissonance. And what cognitive dissonance is it's a psychology theory, but that basically says that we are always trying to stay at a state of equilibrium. We are always looking for things that will confirm our beliefs in the world around us, will confirm our values, will confirm what we grew up understanding about the world. So if I grew up seeing farmers as the stewards of the land, then I'm going to look for information that confirms that. Unfortunately, that's not the story that's always out there that we are aware of. We see the stories out there of CAFOs and large farms in Ohio. We see how animals are cared for, people who are trying to put negative stories out there. So if that's something that I've seen a lot and has become part of what I consider my schema or my view of the world, I'm going to look for information that is going to help keep that in line. And if for some reason somebody gives me a story that goes against that, I'm going to quickly look at how do I take that information and put it into a form that will help me feel comfortable with what I know. We as humans don't want to be wrong. We want to understand the world in the way that we were taught to understand it. So as we look at how we're going to put a story out there and how we frame that message, we've got to think about who are we trying to hit with this story. It's hard to put a story out there that is just going to affect everybody. So if I'm putting a story out there, on the milk dumping per se, I need to think about who am I trying to hit with this story, and Joy nudge that a little bit with thinking of your audience. am I putting it out there to mothers who are probably at the grocery stores and looking for milk or seeing signs that say that you can't buy more than 2 gallons of milk because there's a surplus or there's not enough, I mean, sorry. If they're seeing a sign that says there's not enough milk to allow me to buy enough for my family, yeah, I'm seeing on the news stories of farmers dumping milk, I'm going to hit this state of confusion and misunderstanding, and I'm going to be looking for information that helps me make sense of that. And that's where we can make sure that if I have a dairy farmer that I know who could put out information in a way that would reach that audience, I want to tap into them and make sure that they're telling their story. And if this is a parent or buying audience that we know is science-based or appreciates science, then making sure that we're bringing in the science to that story and we're framing it in a way that allows science to be positive in the story. And some of that framing comes to who's telling the story, not only just who our protagonist is in the story, but who's the one conveying the story to us. And are we using images versus video of the story, or are we putting out just text to that story? So do we use science-based information? The answer is yes and no. It really depends on, is somebody that we're talking to somebody who's going to take the idea of using science-based information in a positive light? And we're facing a lot of consumers today that don't always see science in a positive way. But I think the one thing that I've seen out of a lot of the stories that we're seeing in the last few weeks is that people are trusting science a little bit more. They're listening to it a little bit more. So that's hopefully going to be a positive for us in how we tell these stories and what we include in our stories over time. Joy, if you want to go to the next slide. I'm so used to just hitting click and it going to the next one.
I have an example that I might be able to
share.
There should be a way to help with this too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
So a few years ago, I was doing some research on consumers' perceptions of GMOs. And so I think this example will help you with that. Do we share the science or do we not share the science question? And so in this research, we were collecting consumers' perceptions of GMOs, and we had a section of the survey where it asked them to select the statement that most aligned with their beliefs and to select the statement that most disaligned with their beliefs. And at the time it was soon after the meta-analysis came out saying that GMOs were safe for human conception, and scientists and agriculturalists throughout the nation were trying to convince everybody that GMOs are safe because this meta-analysis came out. And so that was the message you were hearing from the industry and from scientists was GMOs are safe, GMOs are safe. And in the research, we found that the statement that they most disaligned with, the one that they disagreed with the most, was that GMOs were safe. The one that they most agreed with or most aligned with was that more long-term research needed to be done on the safety of GMOs. And this finding really stuck with me because while we were out there trying to lead all of our conversations and our stories with GMOs are safe, by simply changing the conversation and saying, hey, more long-term research needs to be done, but research right now shows that it's safe, we wouldn't be turning off our audience right away, right? And any scientist that I had talked to would agree that more long-term research needed to be done on the safety of GMOs. And so that was a statement that we could get behind. And if we led the conversation on that value that the consumers most agreed with, then they were going to be more likely to listen to what we had to say. And then eventually we could introduce that science. But if we led with that science that they did not agree with, they were just going to get turned off, have this cognitive dissonance, and leave us right away and never listen to the rest of our story. And so I think sometimes, like Dr. Buck said, it's identifying, who your audience is and what the common shared value is that you have, and making the connection through your story on that first before we go into introducing some things that maybe we don't typically always agree on, or is stuff that might be a little more complex, or providing some of that science. The last thing that I want to say about the science piece is that I want you to keep in mind that while science is important, typically scientists, agriculturalists, we communicate with logic, but our consumers perceive with emotion. And when we throw numbers at them all day, they don't really care always. You know, some of them do. Some of the very logical minded will. But sometimes they want to know, well, I want to know how this impacts me, or I want to know if you care about my feelings, or if you care about my family. I don't necessarily care about, you know, how this is going to impact your economy. And so we have to find that connection. And so it can be a little bit challenging sometimes, but it comes back to that framing and making sure that you're framing it in a way that will connect with your audience.
Yeah, those are some great points, Joy, and a great sort of pushing us into this next slide. A lot of it is values, and we a lot of the research we've seen, whether it's the research we've seen through universities that Dr. Rumble's done, that myself, Dr. Specht have done, and others around the country, or even research out of our industry, groups like Common Ground and USFRA and Farm Bureau have done. It all goes back to that values, and it all goes back to that idea of basic psychology and understanding, you know, where people are coming from and reaching out to them in that fashion. So as we think about those stories, telling a story that hits that value and putting that first and making that connection first. These are two stories that I were posted recently with some top actual really good agriculture storytellers that are out there. Both of these women have farms. One is in Virginia, the other is out in Washington. So totally different parts of the world. But if you look, they're both telling a story in a different way. Lauren on the left, she is constantly trying to connect with her audience by being a mom. And using that as a joined value to reach out to specific audiences. And I think that's something we have to think about as storytellers is there may be a certain story we're better at telling than the person next to us. Where I, as a researcher or a farmer or a mother, I can tell a story that could really hit values with somebody who's like me, who's worried about what their children are eating or learning, like Lauren does. She may not connect as much with an audience who is, you know, some engineers who are looking for really tight facts and information. So understanding where your story can fit in and who that audience is becomes really important. So for her, in telling this story, she uses a lot of photos like this of cute chicks. She does things where she's actually started like a farm school during this time where she's telling a bunch of different stories through agriculture and crouching it in the fact that people need school ideas right now for their children. And so she's making that connection. And for somebody who's scrolling in a vast array of information online right now and looking for things, a lot of us are looking for things to survive and to keep going. She's hitting that with a story of saying, hey, I'm a farmer. I know you're looking for this. I'm going to help you I'm going to tell my story by helping you to fill this need right now. So she's telling her story in a different way. On the flip side, we've got Mosby Farms, and what they've done a lot of is very similar. They're trying to tell a story about their farm and how they're working with the land and keeping people safe with the land. You know, safety and concern for community are two things that people are looking for right now, right? And so they understand that, and those are the trigger words, and those are the things that they're using to tell that story, to connect with people, to draw them in to where they're going to start listening to the other stories that they have to tell. So I think that, you know, 2 points I had on this slide was one is is to think about that frame and think about how you can connect with values and the certain people that you know you can connect with, and leveraging that, telling the stories to that specific audience, but also following others who are telling stories is something that will make you a better storyteller. The more you can see how others are telling stories related to what you're doing, the more ideas you get. So definitely think about if it's agriculture, if it's your specific farm, if it's about events that you're hosting in extension, finding another agent who does a great job at telling the story of their events or of the work that they do in their county or their community, and seeing what they use and what's successful for them allows you to play ideas and think of new ideas and new stories that you can tell as well. This next slide, it takes us back to the story that Dr. Rumble had alluded to earlier, and expands it out just a little bit more. Where if you read through the first one with the but oh, my brain just stopped because there's a dog barking beside me. If you look at that but and therefore, am I saying that right, Joy? My brain just froze all of a sudden. Yeah, and but therefore. Sorry, working from home is a good thing, right? We've taken that and we don't necessarily see those words in the story anymore, like she said, but we've taken this message of treating piglets humanely. We've changed some of the words where we talk about, instead of saying sow, we talk about the mom, and we talk about the baby's getting under her. We can even take that a step further of our children getting under our feet. Finding little connections and pieces in that story that we can tell that then also connects to a specific audience as we walk through that process and as we walk through that story. It looks about, talking about the difficult time delivering, using specific words or specific visuals that can help somebody understand how Farmer Joe is taking care of his pigs and how he's working with his veterinarian and local extension. And it's not, if you saw in the first one, we said just extension. We didn't take it home to something that they know specifically by saying OSU extension. Even being more specific and connecting people back to a specific community in that story can make a more lasting impression. Joy, do you want to add anything more on this one?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think,
Okay.
I just wanted to show the example of here's one that's been, the story's been further drafted and refined so that it, if we were talking to somebody who really wanted to understand why farrowing crates were used, somebody without the background and understanding them, this might be a good way to help connect with them and tell that story.
Yeah. And I put on the next slide, this is a example. Like I said, I think we can learn a lot from seeing examples. This is a farm up north. I want to say they're in Wisconsin. I might be wrong there. This is actually the pig farmer of the year. This is his wife 2 years ago. But some posts that they did a couple years ago of sort of the same topic, farrowing and pigs, and where they're talking through two different stories at two different times of how they've taken pigs and are moving them through a system that may look like a large factory farm, but telling that story in a similar way, but bringing it back down to why do they do things and why, connecting it to those values and telling that story sort of in that and but therefore, but in just a tiny different way. So the one on the left, they're saying we get our weaned pigs delivered. We put them in this warm room and we keep it warm when the weather's chilly outside. And we give them more room once they get bigger. And showing examples, showing photos and videos of how they do this type of thing to tell that story becomes really important. And then connecting with the consumers even in a different level On the right, they're talking about biosecurity. And this one they put out in March, and it's, if you read down through her post, she says we're trying to keep things clean for the pigs to keep them healthy, just like people are doing with their families, especially now. And as we tell our story, the stories have to change based on where we are in society and what's happening and connecting with people. So where a story of cleaning may not have connected with everybody before, a story of cleaning and keeping things safe right now is going to connect with more people than not, more than just, somebody whose job is every day to keep a home clean. So knowing those things and keeping an eye on that and adjusting your story as you go to keep people engaged. Essentially she's telling very similar stories here, but she's adjusted it to fit the time and the understanding. But again, around sort of that story that we've told you with the piglets. And I always go back to when we talk about storytelling, using examples and using things that you relate to. Don't try and tell somebody else's story. You've got to tell your story, because the person watching it's not going to feel real. Me explaining this pig story, you can very quickly see that I don't know much about pigs, right? I know sheep, and we don't put them in heated rooms or do biosecurity by cleaning everything in the barn every time we move someone in and out, the same way the swine industry does. So you can't tell someone else's story. If there's a story to be told because there's something in the news that an extension that we need to tap into and is top of mind with consumers, and we want to hit home with people and educate them better, like a milk type thing, it's not going to just the person who has the most active Facebook page or everybody knows. It's going to a person who actually knows the story and can tell the story and be authentic in their storytelling. Me trying to explain crop chemicals to somebody isn't going to go well, but me trying to explain how on our farm we do specific things, you can go to the next one, Joy, specific things with plowing and planting and how we do stuff. I can understand that, and I can relate that back to somebody like myself who can have some connections, and I can relate it back to a garden. If there's a lot of people right now, as Joy alluded to, interested in gardens, what a connection we can have if we talk about our farmers having really large gardens. My husband gardens every day, but instead of having a little raised bed garden, he's got a couple thousand acres. And so just like somebody's tilling up the ground, he's tilling, with their little spade, he's doing that, but on a larger scale. So finding ways that you can be authentic and you can connect and touch people's values. But making sure through all of that you're framing to a message that's going to resonate with people. There are tons of media out there, and we could do workshops just on how do you tell a story in video? How do you tell a story in print? How do you tell a story in visuals? And Extension has those. There's being put out weekly, and we've got classes on that. But you've got to remember that throughout all of it, the one thing that really consumers relate to and draws attention is visuals. No matter which medium you're going to, visuals are going to have a very high impact. Pictures capture our attention. And, even, sitting through a workshop or sitting through a presentation, pictures on a slide, we know will make somebody stop and retain information and pay attention a little bit more because there's something that's catching their eye. So as we tell our stories, thinking about visuals and thinking about the right visual that helps to tell that story, like the images Joy showed of Scott's earlier that really talked about, that showed a farmer and their passion, and so picking the right images. The other thing is being consistent and repeating our stories. We can't just tell a story once and expect a consumer or an audience to remember it. Just like we can't go to the State House and tell Extension's story and what we're doing in 4-H and expect every legislative body after that in Ohio to remember it. We have to continue to tell those stories, those impact statements. There's a reason we have to report those every year. it's that consistency and that repetition of that story will make more of an impact than a drop in the bucket. And the other thing that we haven't hit with storytelling is the idea also of questioning. When we think of that and, but, therefore, there almost needs to then be what can I answer past my story? What more can I, what questions can I answer to you? What did you not understand? Or what can I do to make this make a little more sense for you? And it's not wording it in that way, but it's making sure that you're getting your point across and people are understanding and are having the chance to give you that feedback. We know in communications research from early on to today, so research shows that feedback loop is hugely important with consumers and audiences everywhere, and understanding the message, understanding your story, and keeping it. So if you're giving that elevator pitch or that story that Joy was talking about, it's then giving them the chance to respond and ask the questions and get a full growth of understanding. Joy, what would you like to add in? Anything?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Yeah, I know any questions that you guys have?
If you do have questions, you can unmute your mic and ask it, or ask through the chat box.
And this is a topic that, both Dr. Rimmel and I teach multiple classes on, and we can do multiple workshops on. This is a much longer topic than an hour, but we wanted to be able to give you a little bit of an idea. Knowing some of the people that are on this call, we have some amazing storytellers already that are on this call that have done this and practiced. And so using your network around you to learn and see each other's stories can make a huge difference. No questions? You guys are like my undergrads who just sit there and stare at me.
There's one.
Yeah. So Amanda asked, some good storytellers. Jay Hill is amazing. He's the video that I started with. He is out towards Arizona, New Mexico. He's a farmer who started farming. His grandfather gave him a couple hundred acres as a kid. His father didn't farm, and he does a really, really good job of telling stories and connecting. He's actually been used by a lot of the commodity organizations and a lot of the big organizations recently because of his ability to storytell. Like I said, the Lauren that I had posted up there, Lauren Abergast, is also a very good storyteller. She has a blog called Paint the Town Ag. The other thing I would suggest is if you just type in Jay Hill in social media, he will come up. I think his handle is just Jay Hill. But if you Google him and farming, you'll find him very, very easily. Another thing, the Animal Ag Alliance out of DC posted about a year ago, or maybe not even a year ago, a list that if you would Google them, they have a whole list of farmers to follow, people that they think have done a really good job of telling livestock or stories over time in Instagram and Facebook and blogging, most specifically Instagram. But they've got some really neat storytellers. But people like Shark Farmer and Farm Babe, the ones that we hear on a regular basis, the reason we hear them is because they're successful in telling stories. So even just following some of those big popular names right now can be good. There's a woman, Sheepishly Me, out of Canada, who does some really neat storytelling around sheep. Joy, you've got some others, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Joy. Joy. I was thinking it was Hill J, but I couldn't remember exactly.
going through my Instagram scroll here. One that I follow is Faith, Family, and Beef. And then I know that a blog, Messy Kennedy, is one. Her story is kind of interesting because she actually started her blog to try to help people understand the dairy industry. And it used to be called something like Dairy Production Today or something like that. And she realized that she wasn't connecting with her target audience. And so she changed her blog title to Messy Kennedy. And she actually changed her platform to talk more about what it was like to be a mother and a wife on a dairy farm. And so she changed her whole platform and led with the mother and wife stuff and worked in the dairy stuff because she found that just leading with the dairy stuff wasn't working. And so she's kind of fun to follow. I follow Amanda Radke too. She's a little more of a advocate for the industry as well. But she sometimes has good stuff. Row crop.
Jay is good with crops. He is good. There's another guy I'll give you too.
Yeah, there's another one that I know that I follow and I can't find him right now.
And Joy and Emily, we'll be sending out an evaluation. So if there's any other blogs or social media people that you may want to suggest that they follow, we can add those into that email.
Okay.
And that would save you from having to, quickly scroll through your accounts, because I know you're on the spot trying to answer questions and check out this information. So we'll be glad to add that.
So people that I follow that I don't necessarily like going off of this, I don't think they would necessarily fall into like a storytelling per se, because their videos are very much just like them just walking around the farm or like doing a task for the day. But like Millennial Farmer and like How Farms Work are two machine row crop people that I like to follow. And they're just funny. Like, I think that's how they really connect with their audience, is that they're just down to earth, their normal self. And I feel like that kind of connects them with their audience. And I know they have several thousand followers.
Thank you.
Yeah, Millennial Farmer's great. Is a good one. And like I said, Shark Farmer is also very similar to Millennial Farmer in what they share. A lot of good ones out there, and it's worth, and the one thing you can do is once you start looking at them, Farm Girl with Curls, Lauren is good. She's down in Southern Ohio as a swine farmer. But there's a lot of them, and once you start looking at one, you'll start seeing that they all follow each other. So they're all picking and taking different stories. USFRA, I've done some work with them, and they have a list of farmers on their website that are really good as well.
Well, thank you, Emily and Joy, Dr. Buck and Dr. Rumble. We really appreciate your information today. I know I learned a lot. And if this is a topic that's of interest to you and you want to learn more, we will be sending out an evaluation. So please request that Joy come back and teach us more about telling our stories. I think this has been very helpful. And just to thank everybody for being a part of our ACEL to Extension webinar this morning, and for all you do to help everybody here in the state of Ohio. Everybody stay safe and well, and we will see you back in May. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.